As the two kids stay behind, Rick and Moan move out. Rick is quick to tell her stay on the road until I tell you otherwise. Moan says, "How do I know where the road is?" Nick says, "See the copperheads?" as he raises his head and points at the snake heads hanging on to the foliage. That's when Moan turns and sees that they're on both sides, which means if she stays in the middle, she's on the road. They move, but mostly in complete silence. Moan herself is surprised at what she sees. She's surprised at the movements, the careful, the calculated, the methodical, and very thorough movements. Rick is very quick to say, "Don't step anywhere I don't." Moan says, "Why is that?" He tells her, "I set traps all over the place. Now come this way," as he pulls her a little bit. They leave the road towards the end of it, and Moan keeps trying to get beside Rick as she is used to being next to someone she can talk to, but he keeps telling her to stay back, in some cases pushing her back, as he says, "Stay behind me." This is very important, stay behind me. As they move through the heavy foliage, Rick seems to stop suddenly every once in a while, seeming to check out the area. He would slowly move his head, very, very slowly, mostly moving his eyes, looking around at every area, listening very closely, taking in a deep breath and smelling the air before moving on. She's confused at this, but she realizes what he's doing. He's moving like a predator. And there's something also in the way he moves, something in his stance, something in the signals that she is given by him, by just his hands, without speaking. This movement is too precise. It's practiced. Very, very well practiced. So much so it could never be random. As they move, it's clear that only about 50 degrees of approach can be attained by the boobies if they choose to attack. And that's all. All the other avenues of approach are either ledged up next to a river or is a solid cliff wall. The boobies themselves may float well, but they don't swim very well at all. And they can't climb well either, usually needing to be held up, kind of pushed up into place if they wanted to climb. Even though there's only one direction that their opponents can come from, it's clear that they're taking a serpentine path. And as they travel, the few insects and birds seem to quiet themselves as the two approach. But the moment the pair halt, the noise begins again. It's strange, but they just don't stop that often either. One time they do stop. Nick turns around and looks at Moan. She's confused, thinking that he's going to say something. Then in one swift motion, he draws his blade and swings it right over her head. She flinches slightly, believing that he just tried to take her head off, and then she saw the pieces of a copperhead fall right in front of her. Nick then looks around with his blade ready. Then puts the blade back, turns around, and keeps walking as though nothing had actually happened. This left Moan stunned for a moment, as though how in the hell could he have possibly known that was there? Another time, one of the copperheads jumps out of the bushes trying to go after Rick's neck, which is a common practice for these reptilians. It seems as though they want to go after the throat. But without even turning, Rick even grabs the snake out of the air, and in one fluid motion, he tosses it over his head in the opposite direction as though he's trying to make a hook shot with a basketball, sending the snake flying into the trees. And as it hits a branch, it seems to almost wrap itself around the branch, and with that much force, it seems to be stunned. And as it froze, it very, very quickly became food for the avian species that seemed to be up there waiting for anything to get off the ground. This was something scary to see, as these avians It seems as though their talons and their beaks would tear this thing apart without any hesitation. Again, in that moment, Moan was stunned, so much so that she does not even speak. And it takes the entire day of moving in silence before they reach their destination, an overwatch position on the main booby ship. They listen close as they can to the boobies talking. The boobies themselves are loud and boisterous. They discuss how they will head out in force in 2 days and awaiting the last of the pirates, laughing at the idea of using and abusing the survivors, some for retribution and some for entertainment. A couple of the boobies even find a quiet place off to the side to engage in other activities, intimate activities. Since it was basically right where both of them could see, Rick was noticing and was having a lot of difficulty trying not to laugh or vomit, depending on which way you want to look at it, at the sight of these two boobies bouncing against each other over and over again, to the point where he found himself saying boing, boing, boing with every push. He didn't want to say it, but in his mind, it looked like a couple of soccer balls knocking into each other. The boobies themselves are very difficult to tell apart since you're not used to it, just like looking at different ethnicities for the first time. Aside from their size, that is, whether or not they are bigger or whether or not they sag, that's pretty much the only way to tell the difference. And it's clear by how everyone's moving that a pair of saggy ones are clearly in charge, standing there giving orders but not really doing a lot of work. Rick then pulls out a small notebook and it shows each and every single one of the traps compared to where they are. He backs off, he shows Moan where they are, where the traps are, and what they will be doing the next day, and that they will wait for all the boobies to fall into the trap. Although Moan, wanting to take some retribution, asks, why not just eliminate them now? Rick says, listen, if we attack before the rest arrive, well, if we do this now, they'll scatter, and there's nothing on the other side that's going to stop them. However, if we get them actually in a kill zone, we can get every single one. Then he looks into her eyes and said, gotta catch 'em all. As the sun finally disappears over the horizon, they take turns sleeping at night. With no soft places to sleep, Moan offers her shoulder at first, as she's going to take first watch. Nick decides to sleep against her shoulder, but as he sleeps, his body slumps from her shoulder down to her chest, and eventually down into her lap, almost like he squirmed into position. She found the whole thing odd, but the slow motion and movement actually kept her awake until it was time for them to swap out. She also found the whole idea kind of amusing. And realizing where his head was when it was time for him to wake up for his ship, Rick immediately apologized. But Moan didn't really care. She just wanted to sleep too, but she didn't want to try and sleep sitting up, as that was uncomfortable for her. With that, she curled right onto Rick's legs as they were stretched all the way out. He didn't say anything about it as he needed her to fall asleep, and the whole idea would have been nice, as her clothing allowed him to see more skin, as it seemed as though things were pushing up in different directions as she slept. As he looked at her face, he could see her little tusks, which he thought were cute. The body of a bodybuilder was now right next to him, and yet it was so soft, so warm. Her deep red skin shining, just as a little bit of touch from the light of one of the 4 moons in the sky would come through the canopy. He enjoyed it, but he also had to tell his body to relax down there, okay? However, that part of his body didn't want to listen. He could control his hands that wanted to examine the sleeping figure, but all he could do is hope that she wouldn't notice his other state, as at some point, to keep his hands from reaching down, he actually bit onto his hand. Not hard enough to draw blood, but enough to hurt. His happy friend finally relaxed as the pain in his legs began to build and intensify. As it turned out, the weight on his legs is cutting off circulation. The lack of movement is causing cramping. And slowly, all this built up over several hours throughout the night. And by the time dawn approached, the pain was just so intense that he wanted to just scream, cry, tell this sleeping woman to get the hell off him, anything. But he couldn't. When Mona woke, he was finally able to move, needing a little help to get his legs moving again. And as he did, the relief was instant. However, the deoxygenated blood that ran through his body now, going into his head, made him very, very dizzy for just over a minute. They sat there, had a very quick snack of energy rations, which honestly wasn't much, and then moved towards the trap area. This time, though, Rick wouldn't be alone. Moan stayed behind him, but didn't question his movements. She watched very closely as he began his work, and also assisted when she could with the creation of even more traps. Having to allowed them to actually make a trap he had wanted to, but he needed more weight, and himself was just not enough. The rudimentary design of the traps were beyond crude, and she even voiced this a little bit. However, Rick was quick to say crude, sure, but effective. Moan questioned some of this, but she didn't say anything. Moan spent much of the time creating the pieces that was needed for these traps once she knew exactly what parts she needed. And they worked in near silence all day, making sure they didn't give away their position, only stopping to move from one trap to another or to drink water. And to their surprise, the local water turned out to be extremely clean, constantly running, perfectly clear, and every time one of the wrist sensors went over it, it always came up clean. They were amazed by this. There was also some sort of minerals in the water that made it nutritious as well. They didn't understand it, but it was an alien planet after all. Eventually, as the light begins to fade, they return to their overwatch position, and they watch as the biggest boobies they've ever seen waddle in, bouncing as they walk. And it's no wonder it took so long for them to arrive, being that large, pushing through this much foliage and carrying that much gear. It was clear that it was going to take them a very long time. Each one of the boobies was sit down, eating, drinking, prepping weapons. A few of them were watching as though they kind of realized they were being watched themselves, but not all of them. However, it was enough that if Rick or Moan had decided to attack, the boobies would have known well before they got any of them down. Again, Moan asked why they didn't just attack now that everyone was there. Rick had to remind her by saying, look at how many there are. They're all very large and armed. So answer me this, and seriously, how many boobies can you handle at once? I mean, I'm pretty sure you would have more than a handful really quick, especially since those massive boobies showed themselves. Besides, at this distance, I need binoculars to even see them, and I'm not sure these weapons I have will actually do the job. It was rather difficult to actually get through them with a knife. Hell, my knife was so dulled from going through their hides. Maybe it's something in the blood, I don't know. But I wasn't even sure I could even push into the last one. When I pushed my knife against its neck, it wouldn't go through. It was strange. So, you know what? We have to do this smart. Moan understood, and the long night of watch started once again. Though it was going to be a bit of a disturbed sleep for Moan, as she had trouble sleeping when Nick was just sitting there, and suddenly grabbed his knife, tossed it, and when she turned and heard the clink of it hitting the wood behind her, she turned and saw a hand-sized arachnid now pinned to the trunk of the tree that it was crawling down. This time, she didn't want to be sprawled out on the ground, and she decided to crawl in between Nick's legs and actually curled into his arms. She began to pull his arms around her to fight the cold of the night air, as it was quite chilly that night. And as she did, she secretly grinned as his biological response kicked in before she calmed down enough to sleep. When it was his turn to sleep, Moan offered herself as a pillow as well. Eventually, since he was denying it, she simply grabbed him, pulled his head to her chest, and then pushed it down right onto her thighs so he was curled up right against her legs. He was asleep very quick. However, it was this very disturbed sleep as he kept moving, rolling, and ended up rolling towards her at night and moving in a way that almost made her jump. At dawn, they were awake and ready, both trying to stretch off the stiffness of the night. As Rick stretched, the popping of his joints seemed to worry Moan, as this was strange. However, the sound she makes as she stretches worries him. It wasn't the standard groan of someone just stretching the muscles, but it was almost, interesting to the human ear. They sat there and watched as over 50 boobies made their way away from their own ship, its relative safety and everything, and heading towards the human vessel. Nick actually has to hold Moan by the shoulder. She is like a horse at the starting gate. She's not afraid. She's just ready to run. He motions for her to stay still, sometimes actually pushing her down just a little bit. He motions also, signaling to stay down and stay quiet. They sat there as the boobies passed by very close, but they let them go, each one of them jiggling as they walk through the jungle. All of them getting wet from the morning dew, glistening in the sunlight, but complaining the entire way. The two biggest ones were in front, seemingly breaking trail for the others, only speeding up at certain points when it seems as though things open up just a little bit. To Rick, he knows why this is open, and it seems as though the boobies don't understand. This is clearly a game trail. And with game trails this big, one would wonder what the hell was there. However, it was clear that whatever had made these game trails was probably scared off by so many ships crashing so violently into the ground. And of course, the smoke left and all the other destruction most likely scared the living crap out of these creatures to the point where they did not want to return. As the very large boobies finally reached the first line, this is when Rick started to almost shake in anticipation. Moan probably thought he was nervous, but no, he was excited. The first one stepped into the snare and triggered it, and the second one, seeing this, stepped a little bit further and caught in the second one. Both of the large boobies are now hanging upside down from the trees, swinging back and forth, bouncing up against each other as though swatting one would knock it into the other. Nick chuckles a bit, trying not to burst out in hysterical laughter, just snickering constantly as he holds his mouth with both hands. Moan whispers, "What is so humorous?" Then Nick goes, I just realized something. It's a booby trap that actually catches boobies. As his stifling continues, the boobies are now high into the trees. This means lunchtime for the avian species of the planet, and they swarm in like sharks on a dead whale. They bite, they claw, they peck, they rip, they tear everything apart. The boobies themselves are screaming, swearing as they're swinging back and forth, begging for anybody to cut them down, get them away before something else happens. On the ground, all the rest are freaking the hell out, and they finally find the end of the snares. Not cutting them, but in this case, using their pulse weapons to shoot the vines. And in quick succession, both are snapped clean, and both of the boobies fall out, landing with a loud thud. Unfortunately for some smaller boobies below, the mass of those giant boobies coming down crushes them like empty beer cans. The giant boobies themselves don't make it, as they bleed out from so many lacerations, so many deep gouges so quick, also from a 12-meter drop onto the ground head first, which proved fatal, especially for one when you could hear the devastating crunch as its spine compresses into its torso. But even after losing some numbers, the boobies gain resolve, yelling at each other that they need to go fight to regain their honor and make sure their comrades didn't fall in vain and all this. The boobies continue, changing direction though, as they believe they walked into more of a minefield. And this time, they begin to almost miss the trap, one that's set on a pivot point. However, as another one passes by, they step in and drop down, forcing this one on a pivot point to swing over and hit it hard on one side, while the stakes on the bottom go right through the foot. This one screams and yells, trying to get out, but by the time they realize what's going on, all they can do is pull the booby out of the hole violently, causing even more damage, and that one bleeds out. And as they were trying to get this one out, moving around triggers another trap. This trap in particular drops a panel from the canopy, and the panel itself is covered with sharp spikes. The other boobies come to see what's wrong with this one just standing there, only to find the one standing there with the entire trap sunk into its face and chest. It was done before it realized that it had been hit. With this, the fear begins to take over. They are unsure where to look for a possible trap. Even more unsure where to step, as it seems like everything was ready to take them out. They end up tripping so many. A trap that fires multiple bolts from a rudimentary crossbow. One that's swinging a ball full of spikes that impale two without killing them. However, they are bleeding all over the place. And of course, there's plenty of deadfall pits, some with even more traps inside that seem to grab the legs, grab the torso, grab whatever it can get a hold of, pierce it, and bleed it out. Many of the sticks were found to be hollow, which made the bleeding even worse. And what makes even worse than the traps was the local fauna. The snakes seem to pop out of nowhere, and every time one of the boobies is struck, it seems as though they only take about 3 steps before the booby just drops to the ground. It's not fully done, but the breathing becomes very, very labored as the pulmonary and circulatory system begin to just simply fail. The numbers of the boobies keep dropping. They keep dropping until there is less than half, and as night falls, that half has to stop and set up a type of camp. They've been moving all day, something that should only taken 1 day for them to get to their objective, but now they're barely half of the way to the ship. Over the course of the night, what they don't see as most of them sleep is there's a shadow in the jungle. A shadow moves around the boobies. A shadow that comes up from behind, reaching around, grabbing the booby tightly, almost twisting it and squeezing it hard. Then a knife straight through the neck, moving it back and forth as though sawing the neck open. This is quick, not very clean, but it is silent. Any that moved away from the small firelight, even simply to relieve themselves, did not return. Many of those that were on guard didn't seem to care. They didn't keep the security up more than a few that simply stared at the flames. The blood and the bodies in the morning scared them all, as though the jungle had come alive. And in the jungle, a man wipes the blood off his blade, but when he does, he feels the blade too, silently curses. He's angry at the fact that there's something with the boobies that makes this blade go dull, and he doesn't have the time to sharpen it. Even if he did, the sound of going across a whetstone will be more than enough to give away his position. As he's sitting there, trying to see what the boobies are going to do, he hears the boobies begin to rally. They begin to chant and yell. They get ready to push through, and with the heavy weapons that they still carry, it will not take much for them to overwhelm the ship and even blow the doors to get inside. Realizing the situation, both Rick and Moan hurry away and get into the next position. And as the boobies push through, basically saying, damn the torpedoes, and ignoring the losses as they come through, shots begin to ring out through the foliage. The antique bullets are accurate, but lack significant terminal ballistics to take a booby out quick. Even a shot to the head is usually just enough to make the booby fall backwards with a really bad headache. And as soon as they see this, the boobies almost smile. They now realize this is a firefight, and they engage. They begin to push forward, firing every single one of their pulse weapons, trying to get fire superiority, launching explosions over the side, even if they can't see exactly who's firing at them. And with Rick suppressed or reloading and not firing back, they begin to advance hard, only to find a Winx is hidden in the foliage that is ready and willing to beat these boobies senseless. Each booby being so bulbous, absorbing the hit from all these strikes, but still they're being knocked around and has them completely discombobulated to the point where a few of them accidentally shoot each other. Each one that tries to engage her, swinging around, finds a 5.56 millimeter piece of metal going through their hand or through their arm, enough that it makes it so they can't shoot her. However, Moan realizes that this is not going to be a very long fight. She can't stay in there, or eventually someone's going to rally and someone's going to blast her, and she only gets about 30 seconds of fighting before she immediately retreats. Rick is there ready, covering her retreat, and as she does, the boobies chase her. And she is dodging all sorts of shots, and then dives behind the log that Rick is also hiding behind. Rick then reaches over with his folding knife and cuts a single vine. At that point, a very large log comes down over their heads, barely missing them by about a foot, and then swings down across the trail in front of them, knocking over the boobies like bowling pins. He looks up, sees them all over the place, trying to get up, and says, "Strike!" But then they both get up and run. They know exactly where they need to go, as they can actually see the road of copperheads that's right behind them. And as they do take this route, they can see the ship. Just barely, but they can see it. And they also see Justin running towards them and screaming down the road towards them. With all the explosions and blasting and everything else, they can't hear what he's saying at all, as it's completely muffled. Yet just as he gets to him, he doesn't stop. He actually jumps up and uses his momentum to tackle them to the ground as he yells, "Get down!" And just as they drop, the 7 barrels from 2 separate cannons begin to spin, and they begin to fire, taking out many of the boobies with the first blast. However, the boobies, with their very large munitions, immediately turn, realize what to do, and fire towards those cannons. Though they miss one, they don't miss the second. In that confusion, the three get up and run as the second gun tries desperately to move over to cover the area, as now it has to cover twice as much. As they run, they realize Rick has just dropped, and they quickly turn and realize that he's been hit. Then they quickly grab him and drag him towards the ship. When they get there, Justin says, "Where are you hit?" Rick doesn't even look at him. He says, "Little bastard shot me in the ass." With that, Justin says, "Just get him inside," before he runs right around towards the kill zone. As Moan aids Rick inside and sets him down inside the infirmary, she reaches over and grabs something and then realizes it's the wrong device. Then grabs the dermal regenerator and reaches over to Rick. He grabs it out of her hand and immediately activates it and then puts it where he needs it the most. However, she realizes how it's going to work and she ends up fixing him up. As she continues to work, she says, "I've been meaning to ask, how do you know how to do things of that nature?" Rick actually turns almost confused, and she continues saying, the sneaking, the tracking, the stalking, the killing, the traps even. That's when Rick seemed to grin just a little bit, but there was something in his eyes, or the lack thereof, as he says, "I learned a thing or two from Charlie, don't you know?" That's when Justin returns, but he's covered in mud and blood. Rick says, "Did you get the rest?" Justin says, "All but two. They were squished together, just jiggling from all the fear and adrenaline and seeing how I took out the others. You know, like you say, how many can you take out with a knife? By the way, this thing is very dull now. And when I looked at those two anyway, they looked young. And I couldn't bring myself to take out a pair of young boobies like that. I just walked up to them, pointed at the snakeheads, and told them to never come back to Copperhead Road. They seemed to realize this as they got up and just bolted." Moan didn't understand, as the two men seemed to smile at each other at that point. Onyx at that point rushed in and said, "I just received a signal. Rescue is here. It's inside the system. It should be here approximately, I think they said, 50 hours? Rick says, "Whew, that should be enough time to, fix my ass." Justin says, "Hey, you needed a new one anyway. The old one had a crack in it." Once everything was settled inside the infirmary, they have a meal together. Nick compliments on getting actually two, not just one, but two cannons operational, as well as getting power restored to almost all the other systems. Now they can actually have a warm meal. Afterwards, they all just wanted to sleep, as everybody kept saying how exhausted they were. However, not long after, Moan didn't knock as she opened the door to Rick's room. He had already tried to settle in for the night. But Moan walked in slowly and said, "In our culture, the sharing of battle is a precursor to a bonding." Rick thinks for a minute and says, "Bonding. But oh, yeah, we used to call it marriage, but I don't see your point." Moan says, "The point is," as she removes her weapon belt and drops it onto the deck, "you have stirred feelings in me I have not felt since my last mate." Rick then says, "Being of different species, I can't give you what you want. I probably won't be able to give you children. You know that, right?" Moan is now dropping even more clothes. "It matters not," she says. "Right here, right now, all that matters is us." She then drops her upper clothing, and Rick looks, grins, and says, "Now that's the type of boobies I like." Moan pauses for a second as she's stunned before looking down and realizing that this is actually a human slang term for her mammaries. Then she kind of raises them a little and giggles. Rick then stands off his bed and walks to her, removing his own shirt, which will be the first time that they get to see him without a shirt on, and showing how unbelievably fit he is. Moan, seeing this, is surprised. She reaches out, puts a hand on the chest, backs it away a little bit, and then reaches again and begins to examine. She says, "Not as big as a Winx. I'm not sure you would be able to maintain." Rick reaches up, puts his hand on the side of her face, and says, "That sounds like a challenge." For the next hour, the sounds of angry passion echo throughout the ship, so loud and so long that outside their door, they actually have an audience. As Justin is awoken by this, he looks over, and as he turns the corner, he sees Onyx next to the door, a bit flustered, a bit confused, and also a bit concerned. It's obvious that she doesn't know if she should go in and check on them or not. Justin gets close and puts a hand on her shoulder as Onyx wonders exactly what to do. As he stands there, the howls of pure ecstasy vibrate through the walls as Justin notices the light sleepwear Onyx is wearing. He pulls very lightly on her shoulder as she flinches from the impact against the wall that actually shook the wall a little bit. Justin begins to get her away from the door a little more, and just then the sound of Rick screaming bursts out in a way that should signify the end. Justin says, "Wow, she's a monster." Then suddenly the sounds continue as though they didn't even pause, and the continuous and rhythmic striking against the wall over and over and over again is enough to make Onyx turn and say, "So is he." They both chuckle slightly as they walk away. Justin says, "Come on, let's get you to bed. It's cold, and that thing you're wearing, well, that's just not going to keep the chill out. And I mean, I like the bare-ass look, but you're going to get pneumonia." As they get to her room, the doors open, but Onyx only partially steps in before she says, "Would you stay with me tonight? It's cold, as you say." Justin is a bit put back as he wasn't expecting this, and then he turns and looks into her eyes. There's the similar look that Moan gave Rick. The look that says, "Tonight means optics be damned." As he gets a little closer, he pushes the hair away from her face. Onyx says, "That is, unless you truly think I'm a monster." She looks a little bit perturbed at this, realizing exactly what he had said before. However, she hadn't understand what it meant. Justin then leans in and gives her the most passionate kiss he can, then pulls back a little bit and says, "You're not the only monster here. I just didn't know if you wanted the monster or a monster like me." Most human females are actually disgusted at what I had done earlier today, and they don't want that. Onyx kind of grinned as she said, "I am not human." And then she reaches up, grabs both of Justin's arms and begins to pull him in as she says, "Which also means you don't have to worry about contraception. And besides, I'm stronger than I appear." With that, the entire ship shook for several hours, only stopping when the proximity alarm goes off. Both Rick and Justin head over towards the bridge, and they both look completely drained, but still on their feet. Thanks to the ships being so close, communications can now be established, and both Rick and Justin are grateful to hear a human voice. They're informed that everybody more or less knows what's going on, but they don't have all the details. They were also informed that a Winx and Booby ship are each coming to collect their own. Checking the outside sensors, they can see that a shuttle is coming down, but it's descending fairly slow. At that point, Moan and Onyx actually come out, and they look completely spent and very disheveled, however, quite content. Moan, realizing Onyx had had as much fun as her, looked at her daughter with a strange look, but Onyx simply shyly smiled. But seeing this, Moan realized something. She rolled her eyes, but she also couldn't stop her own smile. After the shuttle had landed, everybody went to the door, and as they opened it up, 4 exo-suited humans arrived, and when they walk in, they see 2 humans and 2 Winks, all of them looking a bit worse for wear. One of the soldiers says, "We will begin recovery operations now. I need all of you to go to that shuttle there, and when you get up to our ship, you are going to need a debrief." Rick just looks and says, "Good. We have a lot to talk about." Hello, everybody. This is Syntax. Thank you for joining me today on part 3 of She's a Monster, So Am I. This may be the final part, or if we get enough views, it will continue. And I do have to apologize for the audio quality, folks. I got some bad advice, and unfortunately, my system is beyond screwed at the moment. So I just want to make sure I got something out. Let me know what the issues are down in the comment section. Now, before I go, I need to say that today's winner is Douglas Scarborough.
Good grief, the comedians are back.
With V and Brian Kemp coming in a really close second and third. And I also need to send out some ginormous thank yous to the supporters of this channel, and they are Steve Uig, Prozac and Pancakes, SS Demon, Skip, MTF Guard, Erica Gem, Brian Kemp, Douglas Scarborough, and Guardian Sage. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. And everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax.
Ejecting pilot.